Hey everybody, I'm here today with an exciting comparison between two printers that, despite being well established in the market at this point, are still worth talking about. Those are the Creality K1 Max, which is down here to my left, and the Bambu X1-Carbon, which is right here behind me. I'm doing this comparison because just a few months ago, Creality released their upgrade for the K1 series of printers that allows it to be used with the CFS, Creality's answer to the AMS, both material management systems. These two printers were seen as kind of head-to-head competitors a couple of years ago, but Bambu's AMS and the ability to do multicolor printing has generally given the X1-Carbon kind of an obvious leg up on the K1 Max. Let's talk about the setup involved. I actually considered trying to make a cut down version of the installation process of that K1 upgrade kit. I found a bunch of really long videos. I thought about making something with a shorter timestamp, but after running through the process, I can say those 30-minute timestamps that I found are appropriate for those videos. The actual installation took me about 3 hours from start to finish. The benefit, of course, is for all this extra work is that the K1 Max is both cheaper and larger. The K1 Max right now at the time of making the video is about $800 at Micro Center, and the upgrade kit on Amazon is about 70 bucks. Tack on the 320 bucks for the CFS unit itself, and we'll throw on like an extra 10 bucks for extra PTFE tubes, brings it to an even $1,200. The X1-Carbon, by comparison, is 1,500 with the included AMS, so that's kind of like a savings of 300 bucks there between the two. Also, the build volume for the K1 Max is 44 millimeters bigger in every direction, and while that may not sound like much, it can be a welcome addition when it comes to what you can feasibly print on one bed. But let's run a job on each printer and see how they do. I chose to print this Pokédex. It requires two build plates, both of which use four colors from the AMS. I'll use each slicer's default settings for high-speed PLA. Both completed the jobs within a few minutes of each other. This was really hard to compare the time on these because my printers have drastically different PTFE tube lengths on them. That said, I suspect the K1 Max would be a little bit faster given a more empirical competition. Bambu won on overall finish quality. You can see a little more of the vibrations in the print on the K1 Max, while the X1-Carbon has just kind of that beautiful finish to it that Bambu is known for. The hinge on the model also works just a little bit better on the print that came off the X1-Carbon. That said, both models printed with a high quality finish, and I would happily use either one. On the software front, Bambu is the clear winner, although Creality continues to make big strides in their slicing software, especially recently. I won't spend too much time on this as the subject has already been covered, kind of beat to death in other videos. As far as firmware goes, Creality has some work to do as far as the K1 series goes. I've encountered a few annoying little bugs throughout the process that don't necessarily break any of the functionality, but can take away from the seamless experience you might hope for. One of the things that happens in particular is just that the machine will like finish and stay heated up in every capacity despite telling me that the job is done. I'll either have to restart the machine or manually take the temperatures down. Something else that sometimes happens is just that the CFS, for whatever reason, even though everything goes as planned, it tells me that it had trouble loading the filament. And then I find I restart the machine and everything goes back to normal, even in the middle of a print. But those are two things I've noticed that I imagine will probably get kind of ironed out as Creality, makes updates to that firmware. One other thing I'll note about Creality's firmware is that there are very few presets loaded as far as filament settings. Again, I think that will improve. And of course, there's the issue of filament waste. The Bambu has a nice, lovely poop chute, while the K1 Max, again, not built with the CFS in mind, dumps the poop into the bottom of the printer. Not the most elegant solution, but it works. The K1 upgrade kit does come with some simple addition pieces that kind of keep the expelled filament from interfering with the operation of the printer. And on the bright side, you won't forget about cleaning up your filament poop with the K1 Max. It's always right there. Whereas with the Bambu, sometimes I just forget to empty the bin that I have on the back. So those are the printers. What about the filament management systems? Both had their own distinct advantages and disadvantages. Starting with the AMS, it's a little more compact than the CFS, particularly in the vertical dimension. This can matter if you're trying to stack them one above the other. As far as operation, the AMS operates on the machine's power with no external supply needed. This is not necessarily true of the recently released AMS2, but we're not talking about that today. When I was experimenting with my PTFE tubes and trying to move the filament over larger distances, I found that the AMS seemed to have just a little bit better pulling strength than the CFS. Couple of issues I have with the Bambu AMS. The desiccant packs are just a little bit too small. I use these 20-gram packs and they just barely fit. The other thing is that the force required actually to get the filament into the little loading tube is too much for my kids, which means that they can't help me load my Bambu printer. So some things I liked a little better about the CFS. It seemed more airtight than the AMS. It has these nice sturdy latches on the side and seems to keep the humidity lower on average than the AMS. Which brings me to my next point, which is that the ID number and the humidity level are visible right on the front of the unit. It's also much easier to feed the filament. Kind of like I said, it's hard for my kids to feed filament into the AMS. All you have to do with the CFS is tuck the end of the roll down into the machine and it does the work. There are a few things, though, that I didn't like. Firstly, it's very difficult to clear failures. The motor in the CFS seems to grip tightly to the filament by default, and when I was trying to get the filament out of the machine during a jam with the machine powered off, the spinning motor was actually causing so much resistance that it was causing power spikes in the device. And as I alluded to earlier, it has a bigger vertical footprint, which means I had to build my bottom shelf actually taller than the other shelves that I have for the AMS. As far as reliability goes, I have to say both machines do a marvelous job. Almost every failure I encountered from either one of them, I could, after further inspection, attribute either to user error or to dirty or worn out parts. Probably the two biggest cautions I'll give on those failures is, again, just making sure there's no bends in the tubes that are unnecessary. Try and keep things as straight as possible. And the other thing, particularly with the CFS, is try to keep your rollers clean. Dirty rollers tend to make for slipping spools, and that ends up creating errors. Lastly, in the case of the K1 Max, the CFS requires an external power supply. I believe the K2 Plus, which is what the device is kind of really designed to pair with, can power the CFS unit. And so this, I think, is kind of a problem unique to the K1 series with the upgrade kit. There's one more thing, though, that is missing from both of these systems that I really wish the manufacturers would address. And honestly, it doesn't seem to me like it would be that hard to include this feature. That's the ability to adjust the load timeout. Now, if you don't quite know what that means, let me give you some background. So when these units go to deliver filament to the printer, they don't have a really good way of knowing how much PTFE tube is between the printer and the AMS. So what happens is the AMS just starts sending filament and waits for the printer to tell it that it received the filament. If you happen to have a PTFE tube that's broken or disconnected somewhere, it can create a real mess because the filament is just going to get despooled and pushed out into your workspace, and it's a giant's rat's nest. To help mitigate that possibility, Creality and Bambu have implemented a load timeout setting that just says, okay, I've been pushing filament for X amount of time now, and that's long enough. Something must be wrong, and it stops the process and throws an error message. The problem with this is you're inherently limited to how far apart the printer and the AMS can be, which makes it much harder to do what I've done, which is to consolidate my filament systems in one place. My K1 Max is a prime example. I have a bit of a janky setup here where I've run the lines in front of my workspace simply because I couldn't reach the printer before the load timeout was triggered if I ran the tubes any other way. The ability to consolidate filament management units can really increase productivity. This is much more difficult when the printer must be constrained to a small area. It also limits the amount of slack you can leave on the lines. Corners and bends in the tubes create a lot of friction and therefore stopping forces on the filament. I find giving corners and bends more slack can drastically reduce the amount of friction applied to the filament while it's in transit through the tubes. So it's hard to declare a winner between the two systems. Both printers deliver high quality prints at high speed. However, depending on the situation, one might be more alluring than the other. Certainly, if you already own a K1 Max, you might be better off upgrading your current printer than going out and buying a whole new X1-Carbon with an AMS. You'll save a lot of money and still have access to that multicolor printing feature. Also, if more build volume is something that's important to you, the K1 Max is the obvious choice. And of course, there has been the recent controversy about Bambu locking third party software out of their ecosystem, so that may play a role in your decision as well. But if you're someone who's looking for a new printer and just wants to hit the ground running with multicolor printing with very little setup involved, the Bambu X1-Carbon with the AMS would probably be the right choice for you. Anyway, I hope this gives just a little bit of insight into the world of multicolor printing and a couple of machines that you might consider. Thanks for watching.